You come home every evening to the same person, the same face, the same voice, the same person who knows what you take in your coffee, how you sleep, and what makes you cry when you think no one is watching. You have built a life around this person. A home, finances, children perhaps, a shared future that is so intertwined with theirs that you cannot imagine where you end and they begin. And that is precisely what makes this the most complex, the most layered, and the most psychologically loaded relationship a human being can enter. Not because your wife is dangerous, but because intimacy at this level, this depth creates a psychological architecture that most people enter completely unprepared for. And inside that architecture, there are rooms that most married people never look at directly. This video is about those rooms. Stay with me, because what I am about to show you will permanently change how you understand the person sleeping beside you every night. Let us begin with something that sounds simple, but is anything but. Power. Every relationship has a power dynamic, without exception. The idea of a perfectly equal partnership is a beautiful social myth, but it is a myth. In every marriage at every moment, one person holds slightly more power than the other. And that balance shifts, sometimes slowly over years, sometimes overnight. The question that most married people never ask, never dare to ask is this. Right now, in my marriage, who actually holds the power? And how did that happen without me noticing? Sociologist Willard Waller introduced what he called the principle of least interest in 1938. The core idea is devastatingly simple. Whoever cares less controls more. In a marriage, emotional investment is rarely equal. One person almost always loves slightly more, needs slightly more, fears losing the relationship slightly more. And that person, consciously or not, operates from a position of slight disadvantage. Now here is where this becomes uncomfortable. Research consistently shows that in the majority of heterosexual long-term marriages, the emotional labor, the invisible work of maintaining the relationship's emotional health, falls disproportionately on the wife. But here is what that same research also shows, and what almost no one talks about. That invisible labor creates a form of deep, accumulated knowledge about the relationship, about you, that over time becomes its own form of extraordinary power. Your wife has been watching you, not in a sinister way, in a deeply human, deeply attentive way. She has catalogued your reactions, your triggers, your cycles, your patterns in a way that you have almost certainly never catalogued hers. She knows when you are about to get angry before you do. She knows when you are lying before you have finished the sentence. She knows which silences mean guilt and which mean exhaustion. This is not magic. This is what sustained, intimate observation produces in any human being with emotional intelligence. And the map she holds of you is almost certainly more accurate and more complete than the map you hold of yourself. Now I want to talk about something called the intimacy paradox, and how the very thing that makes a marriage feel safe is also the thing that makes it structurally fragile. Intimacy requires vulnerability. The deeper the marriage goes, the more you have revealed. The more you have allowed yourself to be seen completely. And being seen completely by one person is both the greatest gift in human experience and the greatest strategic exposure. Because everything you have revealed in love, every fear, every insecurity, every private shame exists as information. Information that does not disappear if the love changes. A 2020 study from the University of Tennessee found that married couples who reported the highest levels of emotional intimacy also reported the most severe psychological impact when the marriage deteriorated, precisely because the intimacy had created a level of mutual exposure with no equivalent outside the relationship. The closer you got, the more you handed over. And you handed it over willingly, in love, in trust, in the belief that it would always be safe there. Now let us go into something that I want you to think about very carefully. The concept of matrimonial leverage and how it operates inside even healthy marriages without either partner fully realizing it. Matrimonial leverage is the accumulation of relational assets, shared finances, children, social reputation, housing, legal status that create a web of dependency between two people so dense that the relationship becomes, over time, very difficult to exit cleanly. This is not inherently sinister. In most marriages, this web is simply the natural structure of a shared life. But, and this is critical in the wrong circumstances, with the wrong person, or when a marriage begins to fail, this web becomes a trap. And the person who has been paying attention, the person who has been cataloging and observing and quietly accumulating understanding, is the person best positioned to use that web. Let us talk about documented cases. Because theory without reality is incomplete. And the reality of matrimonial psychology is documented extensively in courtrooms, in clinical case files, in psychological research spanning decades. In 2016, a landmark divorce case in the United Kingdom revealed that a wife had, over the course of 14 years, systematically redirected joint finances into accounts her husband did not know, existed not in large amounts, but in small, consistent, invisible increments. Small enough to never trigger concern, consistent enough to build, over 14 years, into a sum that gave her complete financial independence the moment she chose to use it. Her husband described it afterward as being blindsided by a plan that had been running silently in the background of his entire marriage. A parallel architecture he had no idea existed. In a 2018 clinical study published in the Journal of Divorce and Remarriage, researchers found that in cases of planned marital dissolution divorces that were not spontaneous but had been considered and prepared for over time, the initiating spouse had on average been strategically preparing for 14 months before the other partner had any awareness that the marriage was in trouble. 14 months, while having dinner together, while sleeping in the same bed, while celebrating birthdays and anniversaries and ordinary Tuesdays. The preparation was already running. Now, I am not telling you this to make you paranoid about your marriage. I am telling you this because most people sleepwalk through the most consequential relationship of their life and then are devastated when reality arrives without warning. Awareness is not suspicion. Paying attention to your marriage is not paranoia. It is the most basic form of respect for the relationship and for yourself. Now let us go deeper into the psychology. Because there is a phenomenon in long-term marriages that psychologists call the slow drift, and it may be the most quietly devastating thing that happens inside a committed relationship. The slow drift is the gradual, nearly imperceptible accumulation of small disconnections, tiny moments of dismissal, small decisions made without consultation, minor emotional withdrawals that over months and years compound into a chasm neither partner saw being built. Dr. John Gottman, whose research at the University of Washington has produced the most comprehensive data on marriage and divorce in the history of psychology, found that he could predict divorce with over 90% accuracy by observing just the small, everyday interactions between partners. Not the big fights, not the dramatic betrayals. The small, ordinary daily interactions. The micro-expressions. The dismissive tone. The eye roll that lasted half a second. The sigh that carried contempt disguised as exhaustion. Gottman called the 4 most destructive patterns the 4 horsemen: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling. And of these 4, he identified contempt as the single most lethal predictor of marital dissolution. Contempt is not anger. Anger says, I am hurt and I need something from you. Contempt says, I have stopped believing you are worthy of my respect. And once contempt enters a marriage, really enters it, it rarely leaves. Because here is the terrible thing about contempt, you can feel it in a room without a single word being spoken. It lives in posture, in tone, in the space between sentences, in the way someone sets down a glass. And once you have felt it directed at you by someone who once looked at you with complete love, something in you changes that does not easily change back. Now let us move into something that sits at the intersection of psychology and biology, because the science of long-term pair bonding is not what most people believe it to be. And understanding it will change how you see everything. Most people believe that love-sustained, long-term romantic love is primarily an emotional experience. Something felt in the heart, something chosen by the soul. The neuroscience disagrees. Long-term romantic attachment is a neurological process driven by specific hormones, specific brain circuits, and specific biological imperatives that have very little to do with what we call choice. Oxytocin, the bonding hormone, is released during physical touch, eye contact, and shared vulnerability between partners. It literally rewires the brain's threat assessment system to register this specific person as safe. Your brain, after years of marriage, has been neurologically programmed to not see your wife as a threat. The very biological processes that created your bond have simultaneously disabled your threat detection where she is concerned. You are, at the neurological level, structurally less able to recognize danger coming from her than from any other source in your life. Evolution built this. It was not designed as a vulnerability, it was designed to build family units and long-term bonds. But evolution did not design a safeguard for what happens when the bond is weaponized. Now I want to take you into the territory of financial psychology within marriage, because money inside a marriage does not behave the way money behaves anywhere else. And what happens to financial dynamics in a deteriorating marriage is something most people are completely unprepared for. A 2019 survey by the National Endowment for Financial Education in the United States found that approximately 41% of adults who had combined finances with a partner admitted to committing financial deception, hiding accounts, hiding debt, misrepresenting earnings or spending. 41% in a relationship built on the promise of complete transparency. Nearly half. And this financial deception was not always motivated by malice. Sometimes it was self-protection. Sometimes it was shame. Sometimes it was the quiet accumulation of an exit strategy that had not yet been consciously decided on. The exit strategy that has not yet been consciously decided on. That phrase deserves your attention. Because what the research tells us is that the human mind, under the stress of a deteriorating relationship, begins building contingency plans before the conscious self is ready to acknowledge that the relationship is deteriorating. The body keeps the score. The subconscious keeps the plan. And by the time the conscious mind catches up, the groundwork may have already been laid for months or years. Now let us talk about children. Because when children are present in a marriage, the psychological dynamics shift into an entirely different dimension of complexity and potential vulnerability. Children create what psychologists call an asymmetric attachment structure in many families, where the mother, by biological design, cultural programming, and sheer time investment, often forms the primary attachment bond with the children. This is not a criticism. This is documented biology and sociology. But the implication of that asymmetry in the context of a failing marriage is that the parent with the primary attachment bond holds a form of relational leverage over the children that the other parent does not equally share. Courts have documented this. Family psychologists have documented this. The transition from marriage to co-parenting, when the primary attachment bond is not equally distributed, is one of the most painful and psychologically complex experiences a human being can navigate. Now let us go into something that very few people openly discuss: the psychology of the long game. Because human beings, when they feel cornered or threatened in a relationship, do not always respond immediately. Sometimes they wait, and the waiting is its own form of strategy. Dr. Robert Cialdini, in his foundational work on influence and psychology, documented extensively that human beings who feel they lack direct power in a situation instinctively develop indirect influence strategies: patience, timing, information gathering, and strategic positioning. These are not evil strategies. They are survival strategies. But they operate quietly, beneath the surface of ordinary daily life, and they are almost never announced. A wife who is unhappy, who does not feel safe expressing that unhappiness directly, does not simply sit in static misery. The human psyche does not work that way. It adapts, it plans, it positions. And while she is doing that, while that quiet repositioning is happening, the other person is almost always continuing in the comfortable assumption that everything is fine. This is not exclusive to women. Men do it too. This is a human pattern. But in the specific context of a marriage, where power, financial dependency, and children create the conditions for this pattern, it is important to see it clearly. Now, I want to take you somewhere that most relationship videos never go. I want to talk about the psychology of a happy marriage and why a genuinely good marriage carries its own category of psychological risk that is completely different from the risks of a bad one. In a genuinely loving, functional, healthy marriage, something happens over time that is both beautiful and deeply dangerous. The two identities merge. Your sense of self becomes inseparable from your sense of us. Your decisions, your goals, your self-image, your emotional baseline, all calibrated around the presence of this one person. This is not weakness. This is what deep love does. This is what decades of shared life produce. But it also means that you are structurally dependent in a way that goes far beyond finances or logistics. You are existentially dependent. Your sense of who you are, your daily narrative about yourself, requires their presence to hold its shape. And if that person is removed by death, by choice, by illness, by circumstance, the dissolution that follows is not just grief. It is a fundamental restructuring of identity that most people are completely unprepared for. Psychologist Dr. Gary Lewandowski Jr., whose research at Monmouth University focused on self-expansion theory in relationships, found that when a long-term relationship ends, people do not just experience grief, they experience a loss of self, a measurable shrinking of their self-concept. They literally become less than they were, not as a metaphor, as a documented psychological reality. This is why the loss of a long marriage, even one that needed to end, can leave a person unable to recognize themselves in the mirror for months or years. It is not weakness. It is neurology. It is the cost of having loved deeply enough to let someone become part of who you are. Now let us talk about what conscious aware partnership actually looks like. Because this video is not designed to make you afraid of your wife. It is designed to make you awake inside your marriage. The most dangerous thing inside any marriage is not a bad partner. It is unconsciousness. It is the sleepwalking comfort of assuming that because things feel fine today, they will be fine tomorrow, without any active investment in making that true. Research by Dr. Terry Orbuch, the Love Doctor, whose 30-year longitudinal study of married couples is one of the longest running in the world, found that the single most consistent predictor of marital happiness was not compatibility, not passion, and not communication style. It was affirmation, consistent, specific, genuine acknowledgement. Seeing the other person, telling them they are seen, not assumed, not taken for granted. Actively, continuously seen. Most marriages do not end because of hatred. They end because of accumulated invisibility. Because two people gradually stopped actively seeing each other, and eventually, both became ghosts in the same house. Dr. Gottman's research also found that happy couples who stayed together and reported genuine satisfaction, made what he called bid responses. Small moments of turning toward each other. A hand on the shoulder. A glance. A genuine laugh at a small joke. Not grand gestures, not expensive vacations, not dramatic declarations. Small, consistent, conscious turning toward each other. Every day. In ordinary moments. Because the marriages that survive, that genuinely thrive, are not built in the extraordinary moments. They are built in the accumulation of ordinary ones where both people chose to show up consciously. Watch your marriage the way you would watch anything you love and do not want to lose. Not with fear, with attention. Know your own power dynamic and tend to it. Know where the slow drift has started and name it before it becomes a chasm. Know the state of your financial transparency and maintain it. And most importantly, see her. Not the idea of her. Not the comfortable assumption of her. Her. The specific, complicated, evolving, fully real human being who chose to share her one life with you. Because the most terrifying thing about your wife is not what she could do if the marriage failed. The most terrifying thing is what you could lose if you never truly showed up for it. That is the real terror, not the danger, the loss. The quiet, entirely preventable loss of the one relationship that was supposed to be everything, because you forgot to pay attention while you still had the chance.